Today, we're going to talk about how to start a private equity fund from nothing, from zero, from the very beginning. Today, we're going to focus on buyout private equity. So this is firms that are looking to buy out entire other companies, right? Not just invest a little bit for a minority position, but really take a majority position in the company and potentially buy the entire thing. So where are you going to focus and why are you going to have an edge when it comes to that area of focus? Ultimately, you want to invest in companies that are generating strong cash flows because strong cash flows allow you to finance part of the overall transaction with debt. Now, there are some cases where maybe the company doesn't have strong cash flows and it's more of a distressed play. In that case, maybe what you want to do is look for companies that while they're distressed, they have significant assets and you can borrow money against those assets. So those assets could be things like real estate, or it could be like heavy machinery that's not currently financed, right? Maybe you're looking for some sort of edge there where you can get in and get some bank financing. Whatever case it is, for buyout private equity, if you really want to get great returns, you typically will need to use leverage or debt from the bank. The beauty with using leverage when you buy a company is that you're able to use other people's money and to finance most of the transaction and only put in a small amount of equity yourself. Then you use the cash flows of the business to pay down that debt, and then you end up owning 100% of the business, and when you sell it, you get that multiple. So let's say you go in and you buy this thing, and you only end up putting, maybe a third of the overall value in as equity, and you borrow the rest. The rest of this is debt. Well, if the company is generating strong cash flows, then you can use those cash flows to over time pay off that debt. And so when you get to getting ready to sell the company, you've paid off the debt and you own the whole thing. And doing so can get you a 2 to 3x return on your investment purely from debt. The company doesn't have to grow. It doesn't have to improve margins. It doesn't have to do anything other than keep printing cash and paying off those debts. So point being, figure out what your strategy is. You should also be able to bring a track record to this where you're able to show hey, here are the deals that we've done over time that follow this strategy. It's a proven strategy and we have a proven track record. Now you can get that track record working for other private equity firms, or you can develop it yourself by putting together SPVs, special purpose vehicles or single purpose vehicles, where you're doing one deal at a time and raising money from investors. And that can be a great way to build credibility and build your network with investors, as well as build your track record that you can then later sell to raise your fund. All right, the next step is to really understand the structure of a private equity fund. So private equity basically has three main structures from a legal perspective, three main legal entities. You have the actual fund, which is called the limited partnership. The limited partnership is called a partnership because really what happens is you're going to go out to investors and you're going to say, hey, you should invest in my fund and basically become a partner with me, right? And all of them that invest, they all become partners and they all kick in money into this fund. That money sits within the limited partnership entity, and then you, as the general partner, which is another entity, you control the limited partnership and decide where those funds go. So the funds basically flow into the limited partnership. And then funds flow out to companies. And then when the company gets acquired or goes public, then those funds flow back to the partnership and back out to the various limited partners based on how much they invested in the company. Now, like I said, the limited partnership is controlled by the general partner. And then there's also another entity which is called a management company. The management company has a contract with the general partnership where the general partnership basically says, okay, hey, management company, will you help do all the advisory work, all the due diligence, managing day-to-day operations, all of those things of the fund. And in exchange for that, what we're going to do is we're going to pass all of the management fee that we're being paid by the limited partnership to the management company. Now, management fee is this fee that's charged to the limited partners that's designed to cover salaries, travel, due diligence expenses, all those different things that are needed in order to make good investments. The limited partner is also going to pay the general partner performance fees, and those performance fees are typically called carry. They represent usually about 20% of the profits, whereas management fees are about 2% of the total assets every year. And essentially what happens is when these companies get acquired or go public or what have you, and the money gets returned back to the limited partners, once they've received all the money that they've put in, then any additional dollar is split between the general partner and the limited partner 80-20, where 20% of those profits are paid to the general partner. And that's how you ultimately make money. Now, you'll need to work with an attorney to get all of this structured properly. And there are a lot of really great private equity attorneys out there that do fund formation. But make sure you get a really good attorney that's done fund formation for a bunch of other funds. They'll know exactly what market is. Honestly, they'll be the cheapest way to set up your fund. But you should be prepared to spend anywhere between $50,000 to $200,000 just on legal fees to set up this structure. Now, these legal fees vary because there's different negotiations it might have, and there might be side letters that need to be included. There might be changes. But if you work with an attorney that's done a lot of this, they'll have templates that are well known, well understood. They'll know exactly where market is. They'll know exactly which areas to push back on, and can really help advise you through the entire process. All right, so once you've met with an attorney, you understand your strategy, you understand your structure and so forth, then you need to find your anchor investor. So your anchor investor is super important. They're going to be the ones that believe in you the most, right? And ideally, they're the ones that are going to write, hopefully, the largest check into your fund. Now, there are a lot of different ways to find this anchor investor. Probably one of the better ways is that you've done a lot of SPV deals where you're doing kind of a one-off deal, and you've brought them in and they've made a lot of money with you over the years, and you've convinced them to say, hey, anchor my fund, right? Write a big check into my fund and I will give you preferential terms. So instead of charging them 2 and 20, 2% management fee and 20% carry, maybe you give them 1% management fee or 10% carry or both. Or maybe you make them a part owner of the general partner. Maybe you give them first right of refusal clauses or co-investment rights that are unique relative to other investors. Whatever you have to do what you can to get that anchor investor signed up and on board, because once they're in, it'll be a lot easier to raise capital from other investors. It's kind of like nobody wants to be first, right? But what I found, now having raised close to $100 million from different institutional investors, family offices, and individuals, is that once you get kind of that first investor to raise their hand and say yes, it's a lot easier to get more investors to jump on board too. Once you've gotten that anchor investor to say, yeah, let's do this, you'll need to negotiate what's called the limited partnership agreement. This is your LPA. It is the governing document for the relationship between the general partner and the limited partner. The limited partner is generally limited in how much control they have over where the money goes. And the reason for that is because it would be really hard to try to appease 50 different investors every time you want to do a deal. And so you want the flexibility to be able to allocate funds without having to go back and get sign off every single time. Sometimes there might also be conflicts of interest, and having that limited partnership entity provides liability protection for both you and for the limited partner should things go sideways or go south if there were those conflicts. Anyways, your attorney can help you draft your initial version of your LPA, and then will help negotiate things on your behalf and alongside you with your anchor investor. Now, once you've negotiated that LPA with your anchor, hopefully it shouldn't change too much. And if you have a really good anchor that other investors really respect, they're not likely to push back on many of your terms. And in fact, they're probably going to trust that your anchor investor did a really good job negotiating and on their behalf effectively. If they do have certain things that they want to change, oftentimes you can address those on a side letter, and you just handle those on a one-off basis. Once you've gotten your anchor investor, you've negotiated your LPA, you've got a bunch of other investors that have said, yes, let's do this. Now you got to move them all to a close. So the way you do this is by sending them what's called a subscription agreement. This is another document that your lawyers can help you draft, and usually they'll just have one off the shelf that they can use. The subscription agreement does a few things. One, it ensures that your investors meet the various requirements laid out by the SEC to be able to invest in a fund like yours. They may need to be accredited or qualified. It really depends on your fund and your fund structure and your fund size and so forth, and your attorney can help you figure those things out. It also includes their contact information, where they want funds sent, when there's a distribution, or if you're distributing stock, where the stock should be sent, and includes how much they're going to invest, pertinent contact information, and then gives you the opportunity to accept their commitment and close out their investment. So those are basically the different steps required to raise a private equity fund and pull it all together from scratch, and the various different entities. If this video is helpful to you, check out some of my other videos like how to get into venture capital without experience. Thanks.